Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a great day. So, you want to write a book. So many people say this to me when they find out that I'm a writer and that I've written, I guess, quite a few books at this point. Here's what you need to know before you write a book. So, what do you need to do to write a book? What most people are going to do is they're going to sit down at a keyboard and they're going to hope that they can make a book happen by typing into a word processor. Or maybe if you're particularly old school, you get out a notebook and start writing. But that's almost a surefire way to end up failing at your objective, which is to write a book. So I've talked about this in the past. There are 4 phases to book creation. There's planning, drafting, revision, and then publication. But there's a little bit more to that, and this is where I really would like to talk about my book, The Keys to Prolific Creativity, which you can get on Amazon for $2.99, because that is more about the process. How do you create and maintain a creative process that allows you to finish your projects and get them out on time? So that's the other half, and I wrote a whole book about that because honestly, that's where I see most people failing, is that they're not able to stick with it. They're not able to develop a process that allows them to be creative and to finish what they start. So just a few tips out of that book. The big one is consistency. The more consistent you are with doing your work, with whatever your goal is, doing work towards that goal, the more consistently you're going to be able to achieve that goal. I talk about other things like creating achievable goals, right? If you sit down and you're like, I want to write a book, and it's going to be, it's going to be a 1,500-page epic fantasy book, and it's going to be the best book ever written. It's like, you're probably going to have a bad time with that. You need to create a more manageable goal, like writing a 10,000-word story or something like that. So having realistic and manageable goals is really important. But the consistency is the big thing, because even if your goal is really big, if you want to write a big, long book, if you're able to sit down at your computer and just work for an hour a day, eventually you will probably be able to finish it, unless you lose your will to do it along the way, which can happen quite a few times. And that's where I bring in the other side of this, which is knowing how books are actually created. So I talk about those 4 phases of book creation, which is planning, drafting, revision, and then publication. The planning phase is where you plan not just what the book is going to be and what kind of stuff is going to be in the book, but also how you're going to go about writing it. So that process part of it, I believe, is also part of planning. Depending on what kind of book I'm working on, that will change my process for how I do it. So if I want to write a book really quickly, well, I'm going to drop some of the other things that I do. I'll make fewer videos, or I'll let something else go in my life that just for temporary time, so I can really sprint on a book. I'll make those decisions during the planning phase. The other part of the planning phase is knowing what goes into actually planning a book. So planning a book means you want to know the characters, the setting, and the plot. You want to know where the book takes place. You want to know who is in the book, and of course you're going to want to know what happens in the book. So some people like to do really thorough outlines of books. Other people like to be what are called gardeners. So it's like an architect versus a gardener. I think this something George R.R. Martin said years ago. Some people get really excited by not knowing all the details of their story, but you usually want to know some basics before you begin, like who the main character is. So even if you start with something really simple, like I want to write a story about this main character. He looks like this. I'm imagining he does this thing and he has some objective. So if you have a goal for the plot, if you have some sort of conflict that has to be resolved in the story and you have a character to resolve it, well, you have a start for your book. So that's the most important thing there. And then, of course, that character has to exist in some sort of place. So as long as you have a general idea of what you're doing, you don't have to do an extreme outline, especially if you've never tried to write fiction before. Just view it as a learning process, and when you get stuck on a place because you haven't thought about ahead of time, you can stop, pause, go back to the planning phase, and then work things out from there. But you want to know, have a basic idea of setting, characters, and plot. From there, you can generate an outline. This character does this character does that, an order of things. I'm not going to go into like more complex ideas than that, like how you format a manuscript to be a 3-act style story or a 5-act style story. I've done both of those. Or an Odyssey style. Those are all different ways of approaching how you write it, and there's other videos on that. But the main thing is you want a conflict, which is a problem that has to be resolved. A character who's going to resolve that problem and has a reason to resolve it. And then finally, you want to have a place that takes place in. So if you're looking at something like a Conan story or Fafhrd and the Grey Mouse, or the conflict might be, we want to steal this thing and get a reward for it. They're going to solve that by stealing the item. You have a main character like Conan who's going to do it, and he's in a place like Hyboria, and he's in a new city that you conjured up that's full of thieves or snake people or whatever you want to put in your story. If you have those basic things in mind, you can write a story from there. So phase 2 is the drafting, and this is where most people think of as writing the book, is where you sit down and you write the sentences and you write the dialogue that are the book. That's the actual place where you write the book. And the reason it's only one phase of 4 is that there's more that goes into making a book than just putting the words on the page. This is a really critical step, and this is usually where people fail. And they'll fail because they didn't do enough work on the planning phase, or they're not willing to go back and throw away things that they've written because they don't realize they don't work. I've heard several people say, Brian Niemeyer, who I've had on the show before, will say you're either going to do your planning before you start the book, or you're going to do it after you start the book. So you're going to outline beforehand, or you're going to outline afterwards, which means you're going to be doing a lot of editing in that third phase, the revision phase. So the better job you do with planning, the less work you have to do in the revision phase before you can move on to publication. But the drafting is where the most work is going to happen, especially if you're a newbie. And that's also kind of the most creative place to me. That's the phase that I enjoy the most, is really just sitting down and writing the scenes, writing the dialogue, coming up with the sentences, thinking about how the characters look in are acting in a particular place. That's what invigorates me, is that drafting phase. And I find that most authors are really invigorated by the drafting phase as well. Some people get really put off if they've overplanned it because they don't feel like they're very creative in that phase. But you do want to have a basic idea of what you're doing before you get into the drafting phase. And that's where the process part also comes in. Not only are you planning, you're planning your process. So your process, I'm going to write 1,000 words a day until my 10,000 word story is finished. Boom, you've written a little novelette or short story in 10 days. Well, that's great. Think about how many of those you could do a year. You could do 50 of those a year if you are ignoring all the other phases of the creation. But anyway, you could draft a book in 10 days. If you're writing 1,000 words a day, well, you could write a fairly long novel. 100,000 words is actually a fairly long novel, longer than most of the books you had to read in high school, which were probably in the 50 to 60,000 word range for most of the books. You get that done in 100 days. That's a third of a year, or an extended season of work. As long as you're consistent with it and you're doing it every day. Maybe you miss a day here or there because something comes up. That's how things work. But you're consistent. I work from 9 to 10, or I work a specific amount of time. What helps that as well is if you're going to sit down and write, you know what you're going to write that day. That's where that planning phase comes in. It's like you go back to the plan. Oh, I know what happens next, and then I'm going to write it. And that's more or less how I operate as a writer. So yes, you do the drafting phase, and the more consistent you are with that drafting phase, the more quickly you'll be able to finish your projects and get them out. So the third phase is revision. This is where you are going back, and there's always going to be mistakes that you make. And I mean, there's different levels of mistakes. There's story mistakes that you have to correct. You may have written a superfluous scene. You may have written a scene where the character is characterized differently from how he ended up at the end of the story, and you have to fix how the character is talking. Maybe he's talking in a weird way. Maybe his motivations are incorrect. Maybe the motivations aren't clear, and you have to go back and add those. These are all deeper level story things, and if you are brand new and you don't know all this stuff and you're still learning it, one of the things you can do is you can hire an editor, and an editor will point out these things. This is really what an editor does. I mean, like a story editor, they're going to find these places where I don't understand this character's motivations, or it's not good. You need to rewrite this scene so that we make a character's motivations clear, or this dialogue doesn't work. I don't understand what's happening in this action sequence. This is not clear, or the events are out of order. Those sorts of things. An editor will also point out, you switched a character name here, or things like that, or maybe a couple typos, but they're not a copy editor or a line editor. That is a different thing. And I actually put that really in the publication process, because that's preparing a manuscript to actually be published. So the revision phase can be fairly short or it can be fairly long. If your manuscript is a mess, expect a longer and more arduous revision phase. And if you had planned really well and your manuscript is really tight, there's always a couple things that you want to go back and like fine tune. I do it with every book that I write, and you won't have that much to do in the editing phase. So the fourth phase is publication, and this is where a lot of people get afraid because they are afraid that their book is going to suck. Chances are the first book you write is going to suck anyway, and you maybe not want to publish it. You want to put it in a drawer and wait and maybe do some more writing before you come back to it. That is a good piece of advice that I have given out, and I have followed that advice myself. So if you read the Moonsong series, I should have these books packed up, but if you read the Moonsong series, starts with City of Silver. That was some of the first stuff that I ever wrote, but it just wasn't good because I didn't have enough experience writing. I had written screenplays and things, but it was my first real attempt at writing novels, and there was a lot of cringe there. So I held off on that, put it away, did some more practice, wrote some more stories, wrote some more books, and then came back to them later after I had written and published other books that I understood the planning phase so much better. And then I was really able to do the hard work of revision. And believe me, that work was very hard. I had to do a lot of rewriting to fix what I had done poorly in my first go-around. But hey, I was able to do it because I gained that experience to know why I had made the first attempt at a story so bad. That's okay. So you may want to do that. But the publication phase is a usual part of whatever you're doing. You're going to share what you did. This can be as simple as putting it on a blog. But if you have been following my channel, I give a lot of advice for how to actually get your books out published in a physical form so that somebody can hold them and look at them and read them, or download the ebook if that case may be. So the publication phase is going to involve line editing, fixing typos, typesetting it into a book that looks good, that the words look correct and they're a good font that's easy for people to read and formatted in a way that's easy to read. Finding a cover, making a cover, buying a cover, writing a blurb, setting up Amazon pages, all of that's in the publication phase. And that is a really big and busy phase. And that's also another phase where people get really intimidated and also make a lot of mistakes, myself included, because there's so much that goes into it in order to try to be successful. And then once we get to the publication phase, then you're really in how do I market the book and how do I get people to read it? There's a lot that occurs in that phase. But that's the big thing that you need to know about writing a book, is that you want to start with a plan for how you're going to write the book in terms of your process as well as what's going to be in the book. Then you need to be very consistent about writing it until it's finished. Once you get to that finished part where you've finished the drafting phase, it's a great feeling because you know that you have something that you can work with. Even if it's not good, it's better to have a complete manuscript that's bad than not have anything at all. So whatever you do, stay consistent, finish your project, because the worst thing that you could probably do is to invest all that work and then not finish the project at all. It's better for it to be finished and you know that it needs work and it's bad. Put it in that drawer, do some more work, come back to it later. Eventually you can put it out. But anyway, that's how you write a book. Best advice I can give you is when it comes to that drafting phase, set aside a time that's just for you. Make a time in your day that's going to exist just for work and work on that thing every day, as close to daily as you can manage. There are people who can do writing sprints. Most new writers, most people who are writing fiction for the first time or are trying to do it on a serious level for the first time, doing writing sprints is probably not going to work out for you because it's just too exhausting and you just don't know the craft well enough to write a book in 4 weeks, which I've done before. I've written over 100,000 books in 4 weeks before. So you can do it, but you got to be really consistent with your work and you got to really know what you're doing ahead of time. So it's better to just be consistent and try to write 1,000 words a day. And if you can do more than that, do more than that until the book is done. I think 1,000 words is a great target for someone to start with. And if you can't get 1,000 words, that's okay. Try 500 words until you can, within the time that you've allotted to yourself, get to 1,000 words. I find setting a word count goal is really helpful because it'll just push you to do that extra little bit of work. Yeah, maybe it's 10 o'clock and I should go to bed. but I can squeeze out another 100 words really quick and get to my goal. It's kind of like going to the gym and knowing that you have to do 18 sets, not that you have to be there 30 minutes. It's a totally different mindset, right? I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to do all these exercises versus I'm going to go to the gym and I'm going to spend 30 minutes there. You can spend 30 minutes wasting your time, but if you have a word count goal, it really focuses you on getting the work done while you're sitting down at your word processor working, or using a notebook if you happen to be one of those people. Anyway, so that's all I have to say about that. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You can actually get my newest book here, Demon Ex Machina, for free. Go to dvspress.com/free book. It'll put you on the mailing list, and you can get a free ebook copy. You can also buy the paperback. I think it's $7 or $8. And of course, get Keys to Prolific Creativity on Amazon. It's $2.99. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read it on that, or you can get the paperback version as well. And that has a lot more tips for how to develop your creative process, how to arrange your life in order to be productive as a creative person, and lots of pitfalls to avoid that I've seen lots of people make a mistake with. When I talk about that publication phase, one of the things people do is they make an excuse and call themselves a perfectionist and just put off ever sharing their work with another person. They just leave it undone because they feel like it's never good enough. If you're doing many revisions, many drafts of a work, it's probably because you're afraid of judgment, not because the work is actually bad. As I've heard some writers say, oh, you need to do minimum 7 drafts. I'm like, maybe amateurs like you do 7 drafts. I don't do that many. I do 2 drafts, maybe 3 if I'm really worried about it. But because I know what ahead of time when I'm writing in the planning phase, I don't need to do that much revision. So if you caught in one of those trying to believe those people that you need to be doing 7 revisions, nope, these are people that are falling victim to their own psyche and are worried about people negatively judging their work. They're going to do 7 revisions and never publish, or if they finally do, someone will give them a 1-star review, and they're like, their self-esteem will collapse because someone didn't like their book. It's going to happen. Not everyone's going to like what you write, guys, and it's okay. What's more important is that you find ways to connect with the people who really are going to enjoy your writing and serve them, rather than worry about outliers that don't really give a crap about what you're writing, not liking it. Sorry, some people are going to not like it. That's how it is. So anyway, Demon Ex Machina, if you read it, please do me a big favor and drop some stars over on Amazon. That helps me sell the book later on down the line, even though I am giving it away for free for being on my mailing list. A little treat for people who've stuck with me. But that does help me out a lot. So thank you so much, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great one.